Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have a great show for you this week. You're probably super happy as a Ducks fan. The Ducks have won 3 games in a row coming out of the trade deadline break. So, as our show usually goes, we're going to cover those games. We're going to talk about some of the Ducks performances and things that we've seen in the last week, and actually last couple weeks. And we'll also talk about some comments that Murray made recently. We talked about it on our show back covering the trade deadline, but we're going to talk a litk bit more about that. We'll also talk, a little bit ahead, looking to the playoffs and also the matchups coming up in the next week or two. So with that, we're going to go to the Ducks coming out of the break, and they ended up playing Columbus first, and they ended up taking them out 4-2, a good solid game. The Ducks didn't make too many changes at the trade deadline. Everybody was concerned. They wondered what would happen. And in this game, kind of an interesting game, Columbus scored first, and then Rickard Rakell, who has been on fire lately, scored to tie the game. And then the second period, there was a lot of interesting things going on, Eddie, especially for the Ducks shorthanded, as Andrew Cogliano scored a shorthanded goal. Manson, who was on the penalty, gets out of the box. He scores a goal, which in essence the Ducks get 2 goals out of this penalty, instead of Columbus getting some of the points that they thought they might have gotten. And the Ducks ended up winning this one, Eddie. They start out of the break with a 4-2 win over Columbus.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of pegged this as maybe not the easiest game of the trip, but definitely not the hardest. I think Washington is what we thought would be the most difficult game of the 3. But I think it was an all-around good effort. And like you said, it was kind of a funny situation with Cogliano and Manson, because they kind of pulled the same type of move. They both went 5-hole on Bobrovsky, and it's kind of like they had the book on him a bit when they knew if they're going to get a breakaway to go 5-hole. It's not an easy goal to beat by any means. So for Cogliano, who's notoriously not that great on breakaways, and Josh Manson to beat him 5-hole, I mean, within about a minute and a half span, is pretty funny. But yeah, I think it was a strong effort from them. I mean, they had a solid game. They obviously ended up winning 4-2, so it was a pretty good effort. And this was kind of the first time as well we got to see Chris Kelly and Jason Chimera playing on a line together. I think they played with Derek Grant, or maybe might have been Antoine Vermette in this game. They've kind of been split between the two, but they didn't look that bad in this game. I thought they were pretty good.
Yeah, as you said, that some of the people were calling them, the old guys or whatnot, because a lot of people were upset with, some of the comments that Murray made. Obviously, after the trade deadline, our team got faster. But if you watched Chimera, I mean, he did make some plays in there where he did break in on the net and had some good speed. So, nothing to take away from those guys. They actually provided a little bit, maybe less than what some people thought. But, they're in there on the fourth line. They're helping out this team. Kelly's in there too, which some people didn't think he was going to be in the lineup, or if he was, it was on the fourth line, which he was. So the Ducks look good there. The biggest surprise probably in this game was right before Ryan Getzlaf was announced with an illness, and he did not play. So Grant filled in his spot, and Vermette played with those guys on the fourth line. So, a little bit shakeup of the lineup in this game. You kind of thought, how is this one going to go with the captain being gone? And it really didn't affect the Ducks. They won in the faceoff circle 57% of the time. The shots are pretty even. The penalty kill for the Ducks was great. It was 4 for 4. That's kind of, the theme really, Eddie, with this week coming out of the trade deadline. The Ducks defense has been great. Gibson and net as well. And that's been really the key, as the Ducks, right now are on this 3-game winning streak, as we'll talk about the other 2 games in a minute.
Yeah, and kind of noting on those 2 things, the Ducks tweeted out today on how Gibson has been the best goaltender in the National Hockey League since the All-Star break. He's been on fire. He has, I think it was a .953 save percentage and like a 1.5, 1.6 goals against average, which are insane numbers. And to think he only had the one shutout in that span, which was last night, is crazy as well. But yeah, he's definitely been one of the Ducks' best players all season. We talked about on the last show, which seems like forever ago now, that that he was a guy who should be in the discussion for the Vezina. He should be pretty much up there with Rinne and Vasilevsky, other than the fact that he has only 25 wins when you're looking at those guys, and they're getting close to 40. But he's definitely a real reason the Ducks are having success as of late. And then, like you said, defense as well. I mean, this game here was the first time in a while that the Ducks put Lindholm and Manson back together while also having Fowler and Montour together. And now it looks like they actually have, two top pairings on this team. And it's something that the Ducks have been looking for a while. We talked about all day on our trade deadline show on the Ducks picking up a defenseman to play with Fowler. And it turns out they've had the guy in their system the entire season. They've just been splitting them up, playing them with Beauchemin and Bieksa. I mean, Pettersson helps a lot that he can come up and play a decent role. And now Beauchemin and Bieksa can kind of rotate out of the lineup. But I don't want to say who knew the Ducks had, two good pairings, because I think everybody knew if they could just move some guys around, it would work out. But it's nice that, that chemistry now between Fowler and Montour is complementing the chemistry we always knew was there between Lindholm and Manson.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and that really showed in these 3 games. I mean, those pairings have been working out. As you mentioned, Pettersson, he's been rotating in ever since he's been called up, really over the last 2 weeks. He did it here as well, and like you said, it's giving Bieksa and Beauchemin a rest. Peterson's coming in, really good puck possession numbers. I mean, he's not scoring, hardly a whole lot. He did get a goal though in this 3-game stretch, which was nice to see, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he's come in, not really making a lot of mistakes. Maybe here and there, little things he can improve. But I mean, coming in and doing what he's doing, we thought maybe it might have been a Band-Aid. We didn't know if it was going to be a permanent thing. If Murray was going to do something on the trade deadline on the defense, which he ended up not doing. We'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the show. But I mean, so far so good. And the next test after Columbus was Chicago. And, whenever the Ducks play Chicago, it seems to always be interesting. Getzlaf returned in this one. And we've seen it before where the Ducks have played them and they've had, a hard time. But this game, it was a weird game because, first off, it was really early. It was, a 1 o'clock Pacific time start, which was kind of crazy. But the Ducks basically they went nuts in this game, Eddie. I mean, they ended up dropping 6 goals on Chicago in this one. Getzlaf returned, and I mean, the Ducks, they just played well again. The defense, as you talked about, all the pairings, they did what they had to do. Gibson was on point. The Blackhawks had a couple of power plays. They didn't score. The Ducks cashed in on one of their power plays. Probably the only bad thing was the Ducks gave up 40 shots in this game. But I mean, overall, you really have to like how they've continued this effort. Playing a pretty good defense and, the offense. I mean, you got 10 goals in 2 games. I don't know if you can really ask for that much more, Eddie, at this point.
Yeah. And I mean, this isn't the Chicago team we're really used to seeing either. I mean, this is a team that has struggled this season, is most likely barring. I don't even know if they're actually in playoff contention anymore. If they were, they'd pretty much have to win out and hope a lot of the teams around them lose to get into the playoffs. So this is kind of a new look to a Chicago team we're used to being so strong. And the Ducks took advantage of them, specifically in the first 2 periods. They were a lot better than Chicago. I think the third period, which has kind of been a trend for the Ducks lately, they kind of got caved in. And obviously it was ended up being 2 goals that they scored in the third, and then 2 goals that Chicago scored. So, being up 4-1 going into the third period, you can hang back a bit. But, we saw that in the game against Washington as well. So it's kind of becoming a trend. But you can't complain. I mean, the Ducks come out of this with a 6-3 win. Looked like Perry and Silfverberg were finally getting their confidence back, because Perry had 2 goals in this one. Silfverberg had 2. This was probably the Kessler, Cogliano, and Silfverberg's best line. That line's best game of the season as well. So everything kind of trending in the right direction for the Ducks. Coming out, beating a pretty good Columbus team who's fighting for a playoff spot, and then coming out against a team in Chicago who always plays hard, and getting a 6-3 win, and the goal scoring's there, like you said.
Yeah, and then, we talk about Kessler, and I mean, I'm sure you all have heard already all the stuff. Dan Wood and Steve Carroll talk about this. It's mentioned on some of the other broadcasts, but that he's not 100%. He has to do a great deal of exercises and warm-ups and all these things to go out there and play. And What I was surprised about Eddie in this game, especially being there in person watching, is he and Taves go at it, and he gives him a nice shot right in the kisser. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, I was that amazed me because I'm sitting there and I'm going, wait a sec, that's Taves. I mean, I can't honestly, I don't remember a time where I've seen Taves drop the gloves like that. I mean, you've seen him in little scrums and all that kind of stuff, but I like seeing that with Kessler. I mean, he's just like, whatever, I'm not 100%. I don't really care. And I mean, I thought that this game was an attitude game for the Ducks. And I think the fact that they played Chicago, we know that, when Chicago comes to town, it's always a good game. Some of their fans come to the games, and it's a tough battle. And I really like the way this game went, Eddie. I'm not going to lie. I knew Chicago wasn't at the point of how they've been doing this season. As you mentioned, they've struggled and whatnot, but they always seem to get their game up when they play the Ducks. And the Ducks really took it to them. Other than laying off the gas a little bit in the third period, I thought it was a pretty solid effort, and I just like the attitude that Kessler line, scoring, defense, and fighting. I mean, I really thought that line was the best line in this game.
Yeah, like I said, I think that was that line's best game of the season as well, because they've kind of been struggling, and a lot of that's attributed to the fact that Kessler obviously isn't at 100%. But you got to put some onus on Cogliano and Silfverberg as well, and I think this was one of Silfverberg's best games of the season in this one too. So nice to see them step up. I mean, it didn't continue into the next game against Washington, but I don't think they had necessarily a bad game. If you look at the stats, they kind of got outplayed by Backstrom and Ovechkin, but the Ducks ended up coming out with a shutout in that one. So you can't really complain. They're going to need them to be at their best come playoffs, or be at least close to their best, because all of a sudden the Henrique, Cash, and Ritchie line we've been talking about for almost over a month isn't really producing at the rate that they were. And I mean, we kind of expected that, but now this line has stepped up. Obviously, Getzlaff and Raquel and Perry to some extent as well have been the Ducks' best line over the last 5 or 6 games, which is something they need going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and you talked about that. That's true. It seems like the lines have kind of shifted a little bit. In that game against Washington, Henrique did get the first goal, which was basically by a nice pass by Raquel. The Ducks had an early power play in that game. They scored, just a minute 24 seconds into this one, and then Hampus Lindholm, who's he's kind of picked up his offensive game. He gets another goal, which he's been starting to score now. Rickard Raquel, as we said, I mean, he's been going nuts. He had that hat trick, obviously, against Edmonton, and since then has started to pick up his play. And Ritchie ends up getting an empty net. But this was a big test. The Ducks played Washington out of these 3 games. We knew this was going to be the most difficult one. And again, Washington's a team that when they come to Anaheim too, they play the Ducks, extremely tough. So I liked what I saw in this game for the most part. The Ducks, again, on defense, they shut out the Capitals on the power play. I mean, they shut them out completely, but, they just stuffed them. The Capitals had 19 turnovers. The Ducks blocked 23 shots. I mean, the defensive effort there from the Ducks was really good in this game. The Ducks did get outshot 36-18. I thought the game kind of got, I don't want to say necessarily boring, Eddie, but I think it got, like we talked about in the third period, just kind of like, they already had the lead, and let's just coast to it, which I don't mind, but it makes me nervous a little bit. But when you're up by 3 or 4 goals and you're playing at least decent defense, usually good things are still going to work out for you.
Yeah, and when you look at like the flow of the game, they were really playing a solid game, kind of even in shot attempts with Washington throughout the game into the end of the second period, and which showed, I mean, they were up 3-0. Washington was leading the shots. It was only 21-13 at the time, which is still an 8-shot advantage, but I think the Ducks were controlling the play for the most part. Obviously, I mean, again, being up 3-0, but that third period, and it was the same against Chicago, to some extent as well against Columbus, and this was the worst third period I think that they played. I mean, they come out of it not conceding a goal. A lot of it is on the shoulders of John Gibson for sure, but they just bled shot attempts in that third period. It was not a great period by them. They got outshot, I believe, 15-5 in that third period, just kind of coasting. I mean, a 3-goal lead is a pretty big lead, but by no means is it safe, especially in the National Hockey League nowadays. So you can't really do that against a team who has Ovechkin on their first line, has Kuznetsov, who was on a roll, Backstrom as well. They've got TJ Oshie. They got a lot of guys who can hurt you, and I think the Ducks got a little bit lucky to get out of that one. with the shutout, even with the win, necessarily getting 2 points, because I think Carlson hit the post in the third period. You had Ovechkin had a couple chances, and I think if it wasn't for John Gibson, the Ducks, it would have been a close game rather than being a 4-0 shutout.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. And I think a lot of people out there are looking at this in the way that the Duck season is gone. And we all knew in the beginning that Gibson kept this team alive. I mean, obviously Miller did too at different points as well. And I think that's really the key. We talked about the trade deadline. And one of the things that we had mentioned was that the Ducks are going to have to ride John Gibson, especially when they didn't do a whole lot. Obviously they sent Wagner away and got Chimera. They signed All-Star Chris Kelly. As everybody wasn't too happy on his signing either. And so part of the key for this team was to pick up the defense and for the goaltending to be stellar. And the Ducks have pretty much got that, Eddie. I mean, you're looking at what's going on lately. As you mentioned, the pairings of Lindholm and Manson. You look at Fowler and Montour, the rotation of Peterson in there. It looks like everything's going pretty good on defense. There's, not too many breakdowns, maybe a little bit less of a forecheck in the third period. That's probably the biggest concern I've seen, in the last week or so with this team is, maybe a little bit of the killer instinct's not there. But if you're getting 3 or 4 goals in the first 2 periods, I mean, you don't really need the killer instinct in the third period. I mean, you want it. You maybe want to blow out some teams and get 5 or 6 goals, which the Ducks did do in the Chicago game. But I think overall, you have to be really happy with the way that this team has responded. They were playing very, very well up until those games against Arizona and Edmonton, and everybody kind of was a little annoyed. They go into the trade deadline. Not too many things had happened then. People were more annoyed with Murray. But the way that this team has come out of there since then, going 3-0, and I mean, overall, I mean, really, dominating these other teams for the most part, like we said, other than maybe some of the third period play. I mean, as a Ducks fan right now, you've got to be super ecstatic, Eddie. I mean, the Ducks are even in second place now, and if you look, they're less than 10 points away from Vegas.
Yeah, and really the only issue I think is the third periods, like you said, because at some point, if you continue to play like that, it's going to come back to hurt you, and you're going to end up losing points. You might even lose 2 points in a game, a pretty big game. They've got some important matchups coming up now against Nashville and Dallas, which are going to be difficult games. It's a little small 2-game road trip. You can't really do that against those teams, especially Nashville, if you're going to look to come out with a point or two. So that's something they can work on. But other than that, I mean, this team has looked great. You've got the Raquel, who has 6 goals in his last 4 games. He's turned it on. Getzlaf has been playing extremely well. Perry's been playing well. The Kessler line has stepped it up a bit. Maybe Henry, Cash, and Ritchie have slowed down a bit, but they're not awful. They're still playing pretty well. As for the fourth line, you're not seeing it too much. I think they played about 7-8 minutes in the game against Washington, which isn't a ton. They're not making a huge impact. So, I mean, there's not much to go wrong there. I think the big difference, again, is now having Lindholm and Manson back together, which you need. I mean, you need to have these two guys together. It was a nice experiment trying to put Pettersson with Manson, but it didn't work out too well. Lindholm, as good as he is, could not keep Bieksa or Boschman afloat. So now having that pairing back together, which is the Ducks' best pairing, you've got Fowler and Montour, who have just all of a sudden turned into a dominant pairing for the Ducks. And we saw them together sparingly before Pettersson came up, but rarely, because it was Fowler, Bieksa, Boschman, Montour that they seem to go to. And then all of a sudden Pettersson comes up, and it makes a huge difference. Not really necessarily for Pettersson's play, and I'm not saying he's played bad, but they don't play him a lot. I mean, he played 12 minutes against Washington. That seems to be around his average of what he's playing for the Ducks, and they're just really not putting that third pairing out there a lot, which is pretty good, because usually that third pairing also consists of either Boschman or Bieksa, and the less they're on the ice, the better this season. But I had put these numbers together 2 games ago, so bear with me on the stats, but the Montour and Fowler have looked good in the games against Chicago and Washington as well. But in the 7 games since Pettersson's been called up, because that's when they were put together first, the controlled shot attempts are about 58% Corsi for. They've controlled scoring chances for, so they've been on ice for 60% scoring chances for compared to scoring chances against. And their high danger chances for as well are around 59%. So they're just controlling the play every time they're on the ice. And it's continued in these games against Chicago and Washington as well. And it's just a difference maker to have two pairings who can actually control play when they're on the ice. And it's something the Ducks haven't really been able to put together for most of the season. And it's kind of funny that it's been right under their nose this whole time. And all it really took was not having Beauchemin and Bieksa in the lineup together and bringing in a guy who's just reliable in Marcus Pettersson, who isn't, a veteran, a slow guy, a guy who's prone to giveaways, a guy who bleeds shot attempts. You bring in a guy like Pettersson, who of course isn't keeping Bieksa or Beauchemin afloat, but he's doing a better job. He's making better plays than you would see from those two guys, and it allows the Ducks to just lean on the top four defensemen that they have, and teams can do that. We're talking about Chicago and the fact that they're no longer a dynasty, but remember when they were lighting it up in the playoffs and winning Stanley Cups, they relied on their top four, and their bottom pairing was, I think at one point it's like Roosevelt and Kimmo Timonen were playing like 12 minutes a night because they could rely on Keith, Seabrook, Yarmosen, and Oduya. And the Ducks have that top four now where I think if they were to go into the playoffs and have those guys paired together, they can make a long run with who they have.
Yeah, I agree with you. If you look at the way that the defense is played and the way the pairings have done, you're absolutely right. The way that the puck is being controlled, the way that the passes are being made from the defensive zone, they're a lot crisper. I think, Manson and Lindholm, they work very well together. Obviously, Fowler and Montour, they're both great puck moving defensemen, so that works out as well. So, like we've talked about, the Ducks have really figured this out. I think that they've got the pairings down. They've had Pettersson in there, and they, not having Beauchemin and Bieksa both there, which I know some people don't like one, some don't like the other, which, we're not going to get in that discussion. But I think just having, them both not in together is really the answer here. So I like what I've seen. The other part, I forgot to mention this during the Columbus game, though, too, Eddie, is I like to see Fowler's aggressiveness now. I mean, you might have seen him flying around in an arena, and there were some gifs in that game where he tried to help out Cagliano and kind of did a swing and a miss. But seriously, I like the fact that they've been more aggressive, too. And I think that's been a key of, stepping up in the play. Reading the defense, making those good outlet passes. And that's, I think, a huge part of why the Ducks have turned this around, because if you're going to not get your forecheck going as much, or you're going to make a mistake, I mean, the Ducks really, these three pairings, like you said, they don't put the third one out there as much, but you've got these top two pairings, and they've just been really reliable. And I think that's a big part of why the Ducks have, really made this push right now as we go into the final 3-4 weeks of the season.
I mean, it's amazing what happens when talent is complemented with talent. Like, we had, never really seen Fowler and Montour together for an extended period of time until this point. And it's just amazing to see what happens when you can actually put two guys who can play well and put them together, and all of a sudden they actually play well together. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily happen all the time, but you take what the pairings were before, when you had Fowler playing with an anchor and Bieksa, and you had Montour playing with an anchor and Beauchemin, and it wasn't really allowing them to play to their strengths. And now you've got arguably the two best skaters on the blue line together, and there's a lot more freedom, there's a lot more creativity. I mean, we're even seeing them paired together on the power play, and Montour has taken Getzlaf's spot on the power play, and the power plays actually look more dangerous because of it. I feel like Montour is playing to his strength, playing on that left side, being able to get off some shots. Hasn't scored, but I think he makes the power play a little bit more dangerous, being able to put him in that spot. It gives Getzlaf a little bit more freedom to work the puck around along the boards. So I've liked it so far, and I think it's kind of been a long time coming. We had such a small sample size before they got put together, so you really couldn't judge it, because it was just the odd time that they got put together, and we're like, oh, that looks pretty cool. But then we would see Beauchemin get paired back with Montour and Fowler back with Bieksa, and we didn't really get a good taste of it. And I think that's how important being able to call up Marcus Pettersson has been. And his impact on the team hasn't been outstanding. I think he's been good, but just the flexibility that this team now has to not have to put Beauchemin and Bieksa out on a nightly basis together has allowed them to be able to put Fowler and Montour together. And it really seems like they're going to be together for the rest of the season. I don't see why they would really be split apart.
No, I think if the Ducks are going to, continue this push, that they've got to do, what they've been doing on defense right now, as you've talked about. And we've got some fan questions too about the playoffs we'll get to in a little bit, and possible matchups and the division. We'll go into all of that as well. But, you mentioned Peterson and him coming up. The rosters become expanded after the trade deadline. There's other players that can come up. We'll talk about some of the things that Murray said in just 1 second. But one guy that we got to talk about that's really been blowing it up in the minors, Eddie, is Maxim Comtois. I mean, this guy has just been killing it. He's, the second time he's been the CHL Player of the Week. The Ducks did end up signing him to an entry-level contract. I know you're able to see a little bit more of the action where you're at, but talk about this guy a little bit. Some of the fans may not know too much about him, but he's been scoring like crazy. He's been playing well. And he's definitely one of the guys, and we always talk about Jones and Steele and Terry and all those guys, but he's one, for the Duck fans to watch here in the next couple seasons.
Yeah, and I think it dates back to the draft where he kind of fell a bit from where he was projected to go at the beginning of his draft season. He was originally projected to go in middle to late first round, which is pretty considerable when you think the fact the Ducks drafted him 50th overall in the middle of the second round. So he had a poor draft year, had 51 points in 64 games, only scored 22 goals, so it wasn't that great. The Ducks kind of get a steal in getting him in the second round. And this season has been kind of the return of the player everybody expected him to be. And really since he came back from World Juniors, he's just been on fire. So over his last 16 games, because he's on a 16-game point streak right now, he's got 37 points, with 21 goals and 17 assists. So he's just been on fire, and it shows, like you said, he was CHL Player of the Week for the week going from February 5th to February 11th, and then he was CHL Player of the Week for the most recent week from February 26th to March 4th. So he's just been on fire. He's sitting, I believe, 6th or 7th in QMJHL scoring with 76 points in 50 games. He's got 41 goals in those 50 games too, so he's just been lighting it up, and he's definitely the guy who's risen the most out of any of the Ducks prospects. Unfortunately, Max Jones has been injured for a majority of the second half of the season. Haven't really seen him play much with his new team since he got traded from London. So I really think now, just based on their play, it's still Sam Steele, because he still is having a strong season with Regina. Obviously not comparable to what he did last year, but I think Maxime Comtois has worked his way up into the upper echelon of Ducks prospects and has really kind of wowed everybody with his play, because he's not really getting carried by anybody either. I mean, he's playing with Abramov, who's a good young player in Columbus's system, but he's really pulling his own weight on that line and turned into an elite goal scorer in that league. So it's promising, and I love the fact that he got rewarded and was able to sign an entry-level contract with the Ducks. Everybody should calm their expectations a bit, because I know we're hyping him up here. He's not going to be with the Ducks next year. I think the way the Ducks lineup is set, it kind of seems like their top nine is what it's going to be for next season. Even if they add in the off season during the free agency, I mean, the only guy you could see maybe moving down to the fourth line is Nick Ritchie, and unfortunately, I think that hurts his development more than anything. So I don't see him making the team unless he has a great camp. Maybe he gets a tryout. I think that's at most. Not eligible to play for the Gulls, so he'll most likely be back in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League next year, which is fine. I think it's good for his development to get another season in junior and prove that this isn't just a one-off, that he can do this on a consistent basis and dominate that league, and then maybe come up the season after that and play for the Gulls. And while we're on the topic of prospects, I feel the same way about Sam Steele and Max Jones as well. They won't be actually eligible to go back to junior next year, so we'll be able to see them with the Gulls, which is pretty exciting. But I don't see them making the team out of camp unless they have a really outstanding camp, and can beat somebody out of a roster spot.
Yeah, it's interesting. All this prospect talk. This actually really came up at the Hockey Hot Stove event with Murray this past week. We put out a big article on there. He talked a little bit about the trade deadline. It's stuff that you and I pretty much talked about on the show before, and also in the article we had recapping all that. So we're not really going to go too much in the trade deadline. If you really want to hear all that, there's our last podcast. We really went into that. There's even the live show, which I don't know if you want to go back and see 5 hours of Eddie and I talking to each other about what was going to happen.
If you want to see it.
Yeah, if you want to see us sitting there as we're trying to figure out what's going on, and obviously what didn't go on, but But that was it's interesting that we're talking about this, and it's because Murray's discussion. He talked about the trade deadline, but then some of the fan questions asked, what is he going to do now? What's the big thing? And he said that his focus is on the prospects. Now, specifically these guys. He mentioned Comtois, he mentioned Sam Steele, Mahura. He mentioned these guys and their availability down the stretch. I thought one of the biggest things that was kind of interesting is he was talking about Troy Terry, and he was really big on him too, Eddie. He was looking to get him to sign an entry-level deal. And he made mention, I don't know if it's going to happen, but he's saying, when Denver season's over, that, he could possibly join the Ducks down the stretch too, which, as you all know, there's the whole thing called the Black Aces, where all these players can come and at least, practice and hang out. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to play, but as the rosters are now expanded, they can come hang out. So he's really big on the prospects. And this is the reason why it goes back to him not selling the farm so much at the trade deadline, where some people were upset, because he's looking at this, and he even mentioned at this event, he's like, some fans don't remember all the rebuilding that went on after winning the first Stanley Cup. People forget about that, where there were a couple of years where the Ducks, it was really rough, and he doesn't want this team to go through it. So, he's going to spend time looking at his prospects, seeing how they're going to do. Like we said, he got Comtois signed to a deal. He's going to work on Terry to get one signed to a deal. And I think, he's trying to keep this team in the right direction. And when the Perrys and Getzlaffs and Kesslers and things like that, are either going to be retiring, or who knows what's going to happen, a couple of years down the road. But he wants his team to still be in contention. And I think he's done a good job with that. And I think the future for the Ducks is still going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's working in the right direction to make this more of a retool than a rebuild. And we talked about this before, even before the trade deadline, when we were talking about maybe moving prospects. You've got guys like Sam Steele and Max Jones, and now Maxime Comtois, who can jump in the lineup. Obviously, Troy Terry, and Antoine Morand, who's having a strong season as well. So you've got all these guys who can maybe jump into the top 9 within the next couple seasons, when we're looking at probably the end of the Cup window, I guess you could say, as it's going right now. And it makes the transition a lot easier. I think on the note of Troy Terry, I think that's probably the most interesting thing, because when you look at all the prospects and talking about Black Aces and guys who could come up, a lot of the Ducks prospects are going to be in the playoffs, and specifically Sam Steele and Josh Mahura are going to be going to the Memorial Cup because Regina hosts it, so there's no chance that we would see them anyway. Max Jones is on a strong team in Kingston. When he comes back from injury, he'll probably be looking to make a long playoff push, and same goes for Comtois with Victoriaville, and they'll make a strong push to go to the Memorial Cup. So all of a sudden, it kind of the spotlight falls on Troy Terry, whose season will end with Denver before any longer period than the playoffs in the CHL. So it could be interesting to see if he gets some time up with the Ducks. I think that's the most likely option of any of the prospects getting called up would be Troy Terry, because let's not forget, San Diego is going to make the playoffs and want to make a long push as well. So you probably aren't going to see guys like Kevin Waugh, Giovanni Frior, Kalle Kossela coming up, because the Gulls are going to try and make a run in the playoffs. And I'm not privy on the rules on coming up from the NCAA, but I'm not sure if Troy Terry could even play for the Gulls or not. If he was signed, I don't know if he would have to play for the Ducks or if he'd have to play for the Gulls. But either way, if he decides to come over to Anaheim, sign a contract after his season in Denver, there's a chance we see him either with the Ducks or with the Gulls, which is exciting.
Yeah, exactly. You have this talent pool. Murray didn't, give him up on a rental. And I think that's the biggest thing that really came out of all of this that's helpful for the Ducks. And we talk about the playoffs and relying on these guys. And then, of course, who else's name comes up at this event but Patrick Eaves, Eddie, his name comes up, and everybody goes bonkers because they talked about him skating, how he's doing well. And they basically had a good chance that he could play in the playoffs this season. Murray said for sure he's back next season. That wasn't a question. He said that he was working hard and that he was hoping to have an answer soon whether or not he could play for this season. And then one of my contacts that I talked to said that he heard he's been doing very well and that it looks like he's going to join the team practices here pretty soon, which, again, is not a guarantee that he's going to come back. But, of course, it's a great sign. But you look at all this and the way the Ducks are playing now, Eddie, we got a lot of fan questions about the playoffs, how the Ducks going to do. We'll kind of take some of those, we can take them now and whatnot. But it's huge right now. The way that this team's playing, like you said, the top 9 is doing well. The top 4 in defense is doing great. Gibson is just playing out of his mind again, as he has been for most of the season. And now you have the possibility of some prospects that maybe to lean on to, or maybe even Eves coming in somewhere in the playoff picture. You have to be excited about this team. I mean, they're in second place now. You and I always thought that they would make the playoffs, and here we go with the second half push, Eddie, that we've seen for the last couple seasons.
Yeah, and they're not far behind Vegas, and I'm not going to say that they're going to catch Vegas by any means, but what seemed like an insurmountable lead all of a sudden is only a 9-point lead for Vegas over the Ducks, which is still tough to make up when the Ducks only have 15 games remaining, but it's kind of eerily similar to that season where the Ducks had to catch up to the Kings and all of a sudden came back and stormed back and won the division. And I think it was the last couple of games that they really pulled in front of the Kings and were able to clinch it. But any means, I think it's great that they're sitting in second, especially the way they've been playing as of late. 3 wins in a row, 7-2-1 in their last 10. So they've been on a roll when other teams have been struggling. Because you look at the other teams around them, San Jose is 5-4-1 in their last 10. Vegas has the same record. Calgary is 3-5-2 in their last 10. They've kind of just fallen off the pace. They're 6 points behind Anaheim now. And I think last time we talked, they were within a couple points of the Ducks, and now all of a sudden they've just kind of fallen off the cliff. So they're in a nice position. And, obviously I don't think they have any games remaining against San Jose or LA. I'm pretty sure they don't. Maybe a game against the Kings. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to check. But
yeah, they do have one. They do have one against the Kings.
Okay, so they've got an important game against the Kings. They've got an important game against Dallas coming up. Would normally not seem like an important game, but Ducks and Stars are tied with 80 points, same amount of games played, for a wild card spot. So if the Ducks were to fall out of the Pacific Division standings, that's still an important game to pick up points against Dallas. So it's good to see where they are now. I think there's a lot of things they can still work on, but the play as of late has been excellent. I think if they continue playing a fraction of what they've been playing for the rest of the season, I think by no means are they going to fall out of the playoff spot. I think it just depends if they're going to finish second or third and make a push to even pass Vegas.
And that's one of the questions that we had from Garrett. It's kind of a 2-part question. We'll go with the first part of it. He says, who would be the ideal matchup for the Ducks in the first round? And I still hold firm on this one, Eddie. I don't think, the Ducks want to play Vegas so much in the first round. I mean, if they end up in that wild card spot, they have the potential to do that. Or they could play, if there's 5 teams from the Pacific, they could end up, going into the central bracket or whatnot. The way that works, if you're unfamiliar, is the second wild card team. If they are the 5th team from a certain division, they actually will shift over into the other side. So there's some, little craziness that can happen there, which I don't really like. I like the wild card, but I don't like how teams can shift like that because it's not likely to happen, but you could have 2 teams face each other in the conference final. I'm just not a fan of that. I think it should be a team from each division, and that's how it should go. But I digress. That's a whole nother topic. But what do you think? You got the Kings, Calgary, San Jose, Vegas. Who would you want to see the Ducks play? And then the other part of Garrett's question: who do you think we don't want them to play in the first round?
Yeah, so I'll focus on the Pacific first, and then I'll move over to the possibility of playing a central team in the wild card. So if you're looking at the Pacific, I'm going to kind of exclude the Ducks passing Vegas or Vegas falling off first place, just because I think that's going to get in too much of a discussion and too many matchups. So I'll look at the 2 teams that they're most likely to face in San Jose and LA, because I think Calgary has kind of fallen out of the race. So we're looking at San Jose and LA and who you'd rather face. I think it's kind of close. As of right now, I would kind of have to side a bit with the Kings and rather face them. They didn't really add much at the deadline. They got Tobias Reeder, Dion Phaneuf. Obviously, Jeff Carter's come back from injury, and he's been great for them. But I'm just not confident about facing San Jose because I think a lot of their issues have been goaltending this season. They haven't really been able to find a guy who's been able to take the reins in Martin Jones or Aaron Dell. And I think if that can come together for them, they're going to be a scary team. Because Evander Kane has started strong for the Sharks.
Yep.
He's been playing on a line with Donskoy and Pavelski, I believe. And obviously Logan Couture. You got Joe Thornton. A bunch of guys over there who can hurt you. And Brent Burns is a difference maker for that team. So I think that's one you want to avoid. I think the main thing for the Ducks is getting home ice advantage in at least that first round by finishing second in the Pacific. I think that should be their sole focus right now. Obviously getting in the playoffs to begin with, but hopefully solidifying that home ice advantage at least in the first round to get you into a second round matchup, I think is going to be important. But LA is a tough matchup too. Like I said, Carter, Kopitar's having a very strong season. You've got guys like Toffoli and Pearson who can hurt you, and of course Doughty and Quick on the back end are never it's never easy playing against those guys. So, we've seen a lot of these teams over the last few seasons, and I think it's not really far off in the difference between them two. But I think a slight edge. I'd rather play the Kings and the Sharks.
Could you imagine a first round series against LA? I mean, that would be crazy, and and nerve wracking.
Yeah,
I wouldn't mind it. Hopefully, we knock those, out. This is a PG show, so we can't really say certain phrases on here, but we would like to knock them out, especially after what they did when Solani retired. That was that really burned me bad. I was mad that day. I was not a happy camper. So, bringing up bad memories. But anyways, if they can play them in the first round, that would be intense. I think that would get this team. I mean, the team's already motivated, but I mean, if you want to really jumpstart the playoffs, you play the Kings in the first round, you knock them out.
Yeah.
I mean, that I think would be a huge lift. I mean, of course, there's always the risk of losing to them again, but I don't think so. I agree with you. I think since San Jose got Kane, that kind of made it a little bit nerve wracking for everybody. I'd rather see the Ducks play the Kings and then see San Jose fight it out with Vegas, and maybe they can beat the crap out of each other a little bit and kind of wear each other down, maybe. I don't know, but then of course that's going to happen when the Ducks play the Kings. It's the way the playoffs go. It's a battle of attrition no matter what. But I say a slight edge, just like you, if the Ducks I think play the Kings, also just for the sheer crosstown rivalry. We all know that that's going to be intense if that is what happens in the beginning. So that's it's going to be exciting. But I agree with you, and I think Vegas is at least. What do you think if you were going to talk about if they had to play in the Central Division?
That's what I'm trying to get to. Is if they finish in the wild card, most likely Nashville's going to win the Western Conference based on just the point differential right now. I don't think they're a team who's going to go on a losing streak. I mean, they've won 9 in a row.
Crazy.
We'll talk about that a bit when we preview the Nashville game a bit, but. Yeah, I mean they're arguably the best team in the National Hockey League, right up there with Vegas, especially. Right up there with Tampa, especially with Vegas slumping a bit. So if the Ducks finish in the top wild card spot, they would be facing Vegas, which I think is more favorable than facing Nashville. It's going to be tough because 4 of those games are going to be in Vegas, where they've been almost unbeatable. Other than the Ducks, I mean the Ducks shut them out 2-0, so they can do it. I think it's the better matchup. Vegas has lost 4 of their last 5. Doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to regress to the team we expected them to be at the beginning of the season. But by no means do I want to face Nashville in the first round, because that is one of the scariest teams in the league and a team that's poised to make a run to not just get to the Stanley Cup final, but to win it all. So the Ducks, obviously, you've got to focus on making the playoffs, but you definitely want to avoid finishing in that bottom wildcard spot where you get a nice first-round matchup with Nashville, because as much as I want to be optimistic, I feel like that is almost impossible to win. I mean, you can beat them, and any team can win if they get into the playoffs, and I think the Ducks, out of any of the teams struggling to get in a playoff spot, are one of the stronger teams and are kind of better than the position they're in right now. But that team is just stacked, and they're going to get better. I mean, they got Ryan Hartman at the deadline, and he's been good for them, but they have Eli Tolvanen, who, we're talking about Troy Terry coming over when college is done. They've got this kid named Eli Tolvanen coming over from the KHL when their playoffs are done. That's going to slot right into their top 6 and make them even better. I mean, they're just going to be a scary, scary team to face, and I feel bad for any team that falls into that bottom wildcard spot, other than the Kings. I mean, if the Kings fall into that bottom wildcard spot and play Nashville, I'll watch that series just to watch Nashville beat up on them. But yeah, you want to avoid having to face them at all in the beginning of the playoffs, because they're going to rip through most teams.
Yeah, and if the Ducks were going to play Nashville again, then I mean, we've had some difficulties with them the last couple of times, obviously facing them in the playoffs. So I
Yeah.
don't want to play them again. I'm not a big fan of Kings fans, but I'm really not a big fan of Nashville fans either. And I don't want to deal. I don't want to have to deal with that. But I mean, it may happen. We may be dealing with Kings fans in the first round. I mean, who knows? We'll have to see what happens. But I agree with you. I'd rather see the Ducks stay, specifically second place, like you said, get home ice in the Pacific, face, whether it's the Kings, the Sharks, Calgary, whoever it is that it ends up being in there. And I think that would be the best route. Who cares about winning the Pacific Division again? U of I have maintained that. I think since last season we maintained that. Even though they were able to do it again last year, we didn't. It wasn't a big deal to us. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And this week we're maybe getting a preview of some kind of playoff battles here, Eddie. The Ducks are going back to back on the road against Nashville and Dallas. Obviously, the big test in Nashville. They're going to face Dallas again, who they frustrated and shut them out last time. So it's going to be interesting to see if Gibson goes in both these games or if Miller goes in one. But two huge games again, Eddie. And unfortunately, the Ducks have to play both these teams, in a back-to-back scenario.
Yeah, Nashville obviously is going to be the tough one because, like we had just said, they're coming in with a 9-game win streak, and not only are they coming in with a 9-game win streak, you're going and playing them at home, so it's going to be a tough matchup. Again, I don't want to be too pessimistic and say they're going to lose. I think it's going to be a very tough game. I mean, the Ducks are playing well lately as well. I mean, they're going in on a 3-game win streak, obviously not as impressive as winning 9 in a row, but they're playing some good hockey. John Gibson is playing excellent hockey right now, and it's going to be a battle between two of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League this season in Rinne and Gibson. I think it's going to be an awesome game to watch. I hope they can come out with at least a point in this one, but yeah, it's interesting because I don't think, like you said, I don't think Gibby probably goes for both. I think with the way Miller played against Dallas the last time where he shut them out and had 41 saves, I think it's a nice option to be able to put him in there again against Dallas. I believe that was his last start too. So he's going from having a good start against Dallas to playing Dallas again. So that'll be interesting to see how it goes. But both of those teams are playing well lately, especially Nashville. So, if they can at least get one of the wins or pick up a point against Nashville and get a win against Dallas, I think we'll be happy. But, we're kind of expecting more and more from this team with their increased play as of late. So, I'm not going to count them out against Nashville. I think it's going to be an exciting hockey game. We'll kind of just have to wait and see how it goes.
Yeah, and on the topic of that too, programming update, I guess I should say for us is that we'll probably have this show again, maybe after the Dallas game, if not, maybe after that St. Louis game when the Ducks come back on the homestand. We'll kind of
one of the two. Yeah.
We're trying to do that. So we're trying to maintain the weekly show, and actually maybe in 5 or 6 days we've been kind of doing it shorter. But if you haven't noticed, Eddie came up with this idea. Well, actually, I mean, came up with both the ideas, the weekly show and now a post-game show, which he and I have done a couple times back in the past, but it's been difficult with schedules. So we came up with this other show. It's still basically the same deal, but it's the Forever Mighty post-game show. And so we have Patrick from the Puck Guys that's helping out. So it's basically us three, mainly Patrick and Eddie. They're the ones doing most of it, and I'll try to jump in there once in a while. My schedule is so crazy with my real job because this is not my real job. But if you haven't checked it out, you should. We have it up on Spreaker. We're also on Twitter on Forever Mighty FM. And there's a lot of stuff that Eddie's doing on there. And Eddie, if you want to tell people kind of what's going on, you're doing some 3-star stuff. You're doing some more gifts, different things like that. So take it away.
Yeah, just to kind of start, I mean, I think this is something you and me have wanted to do for a while. Obviously, we did it for a bit back in the day when we had a little bit more time. We used to do it on Blab, I think, after some games. Rest in peace to Blab. But
yes.
I think it's nice to finally get this going. I know it's something we've wanted to do for a while. It's something I'm excited to get doing. And we've got 3 shows under our belt now with the post-game show, and it's gone well. It's been received well so far, which is nice. And for anybody listening that actually has tuned into those shows, it was great to have you guys in there. We had about 80 people live the first night, 35 the last night, and 42 against Washington. So it's great to have a good support off the bat. I think a lot of that comes from you guys knowing me and Mike from DucksNPucks, which is great support on your guys' side. But yeah, we do a lot of things over there. We're still working it with Ducks and Pucks, so don't worry, it's not separate. So we're working it all together. It's just nice to be able to do them right after the show. We usually go live with about 10-15 minutes after the game, which is nice because I know a lot of you like to catch it on your ride home. We've had a couple people tell us that so far. So thank those people for tuning in right after the game. But yeah, we also do a 3 stars leaderboard, which is kind of a fun thing. I mean, you guys are all familiar with some teams. The Ducks have done it occasionally where they do the first goal prediction. We have kind of 3 different predictions, which we call the 3-star leaderboard. So you predict the Ducks' first goal, you predict the final score, and then we have a random one that changes with each game. Last game against Washington, it was who's going to take the first penalty, and I think most people got that wrong because they chose Bieksa, and we don't really know if Bieksa is going to be in the lineup on a nightly basis. So most people picked Richie, which was pretty funny. But yeah, so we're doing that. We've got gifts up now on Ducks and Pucks as well. We've got some gifts up on Forever Mighty. You'll see a lot of the goals and the bigger plays on Ducks and Pucks, and you'll see a lot of the funny little odd things on Forever Mighty, so they kind of complement each other there. But yeah, definitely check it out. I mean, if you guys listen to us, you'll like what we're doing over at the post-game show. It kind of complements it well. We break down the games in depth, break down anything that had gone on before and after that game, and then it leads right up into our main show here with the weekly recap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been good. I like it. We're able to kind of do a little bit more in-depth analysis during the games. Usually the weekly show, we just kind of cover, kind of the highlights and talk about team news, maybe league news and fan questions and whatnot. So it's very good. And we have it on a separate website because Podomatic doesn't have a live option, or at least we don't know if they have one. I haven't seen one. So we kind of had to go that route and do Spreaker instead. So that's kind of why the change. I know some people are like, well, why don't you do it on the same one? Well, that's kind of why. So kind of a logistical thing we're kind of working out. We may be changing that up over the summer. That's kind of getting ahead of ourselves. But we're working on things. So now you've got lots of podcasts. You're getting at least 3 or 4 shows a week now, as long as the Duck season goes, of course. And, also with the weekly show, if you want to advertise on the show or get a shout out, we have a Patreon website. It's Patreon, patreon.com/DucksNPucks. We've had a couple people join, Eddie, and I think you want to give a few people some shout outs that are donating to the main podcast right now.
Yeah, so I'll give the shout outs and then I'll go over it a bit and let everybody know kind of what rewards we're offering and how it all works. So we had 3 people donate so far. So Matthew Bernay, who's a writer for Ducks and Pucks, donated $1 per month, so we appreciate that. We had Eddie Richard, who you know personally as well, who donated $20 a month, so that was more than generous, and we have a lot of different rewards available for him as well. And then we have Gridiron Blogger on Twitter, who also came in and donated $10 per month. So it's been great. The support so far has been excellent. I think it's kind of more than we expected. I think it was nice to get those people in there supporting the podcast. I mean, we didn't really expect anybody to come in, but for everybody to really step up and help us out has been exciting. And it's not for nothing either. I mean, we've got a lot of different things we can offer. Like I said, we have the $1 one, which is just helping support the show. We've got the $5 one, which you get a follow from DucksNPucks on Twitter. You get a DucksNPucks towel, access to our monthly segment show, which gets released on Patreon, which we're starting up this month. And then you'll receive a shout out like we just gave from me and Mike on the show for your generous support. We've got the $10 one, which I just said that Gridiron Blogger had set up, and this one kind of bumps it up a bit. You get a Ducks and Pucks t-shirt for every 6 months that you're a subscriber. You get to choose the topic for the segment show for the month. You'll also receive some stickers for Ducks and Pucks to show your support everywhere, and you get access to everything in the tiers above it. And then for the last one the last one for fans at least is the $20 one per month, and this is what Eddie Richard has generously supported us with. And you get everything that I had already mentioned. You get a t-shirt every 3 months, and you get to come on the show with me and Mike for 10 to 15 minutes, talk about anything you want Ducks related, kind of get you guys involved into the show, which is always exciting. So it's nice to have that set up to get that extra content out for you guys. And if you guys want to support the show, it helps us a ton. Helps us with any of the costs that we have involved with the show. And honestly, it helps us make the show better. I mean, anything that anybody's willing to support just helps us make this show better and get it out to you guys and get different content out to you guys any way we can.
Yeah, and part of that too, we're bringing back one other thing, Eddie, is we're giving away some tickets. We've done that before in the past. We're bringing that back. So for the weekly show, if you listen to it and you subscribe to it, and then also if you follow Ducks and Pucks on Twitter, what we're doing is this show and the next two, we're doing the giveaway. It's the key phrase. If you remember from before, basically there's a word that we'll mention, which we're going to do right now on each of the three shows. At the end of that third show, we'll send out a tweet or an email or something, and we'll say, hey, email us what the phrase is. And then basically we give you guys a couple days to do it. And we just randomly pick someone that has a phrase. We make it easy. It's just to get you guys involved and whatnot. We have 2 tickets. They're aisle seats on the blue line in the 400 section, third row up from the rail. So they're pretty good seats. And that'll be on April 1st. And no, this is not an April Fool's joke. This is for real. We're really doing this. So please don't think it's just us fooling around. We're actually being serious. So the word for this week's show is ducks. So that's the word this week, ducks. And then we'll have a word next week and then the following week. And then we'll ask for you guys to do your submissions. So we have that going on. We have the stuff like Eddie said on Patreon. We have the other post-game show going on. So we got a lot of stuff for you. If you're into the podcast, you're into listening to the shows and whatnot, we're kind of going all out here. And hopefully if the Ducks go in the playoffs too.
I think everybody's kind of been waiting for the entire show for that key phrase because
we'll try and do it earlier. I know I stood on it earlier.
If you haven't seen it, we have the post on Twitter. And we put out there that it said that there was going to be a keyword somewhere randomly throughout the show. So if you're listening and you're waiting for the keyword, there it is. I got to do a little bit of housekeeping here just so I don't offend any of the patrons here. I had mentioned Gridiron Blogger is the $10 a month patron we have right now. While I was loading a patron to get his real name and give him a proper shout out. So it's Bob Wiley that we want to give a shout out to for the $10 patron. I just wanted to make sure we clear that up before anything. And the last thing as well, if you guys want, head over onto iTunes and give us a review and a rating. It helps us a lot to get the show out there. It's something easy to do. Just head over onto our iTunes if you feel like hyping our show up a bit.
And with that, we will be back hopefully after the Ducks take on Nashville and Dallas and crush them. We'll see. And let's go Ducks.